It appears somebody at the Federal Reserve has figured out that the central bank can't tame inflation, so it's setting up a scapegoat. Guess who? Uncle Sam. A paper co-authored by Leonardo Malozzi of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago and Johns Hopkins University Economists, FB, and published by the Kansas City Federal Reserve argue that central bank monetary policy alone can't control inflation. I'm sure they're going to be out of a job or they took an early pension. So I find that really interesting. In the book, Inhuman Action, Ludwig von he explains that misinformed observers blame the bust, rather than the boom for economic misfortune. So the average person does not blame the authorities for having fostered the boom. He reviles them for the necessary collapse. So in the opinion of the public, more inflation and more credit expansion are the only remedy against the evils that inflation and credit expansion have brought about. You know what I think? Ladies and gentlemen? This is a giant three-ring circus now on fire with the clowns running around in the panic, tossing buckets of confetti on the flames. If you're just now getting mad at the Fed, I've been talking about this for a long time, you're much too late. Last week, Jerome Powell insisted that he's not going to change his mind on allowing interest rates to rise while allowing the assets on the Federal's portfolio to very slowly roll off the balance sheet. So at the Federal Reserve annual Jackson Hole conference, Powell's speech lasted only a little less than 10 minutes. And he was shaking a little bit. Powell had a fairly simple message. He admitted that the high inflation has continued to spread through the economy and also admitted that a single month of falling month-to-month consumer price index, that CPI, inflation is hardly, enough when year-over-year CPI inflation growth continues to exceed 8%. I'd say it's higher, sir. He then insisted that a neutral policy stance is, he said, not a place to pause or stop, and that the Fed would embrace a restrictive policy stance for some time. Didn't give an end date. So you think things are bad in the good old USA? You want to feel a little better? You think things are bad here? Europe today is the dark hole that makes the US look bright right now. All their massive money infusions have been eaten up by their even more idiotic green agendas and, of course, taxes. The money's gone. The researchers warned of the biggest drop in UK standard of living in at least a century, as prices were, rising faster than wages. The report projected that inflation, adjusted average incomes would continue falling until at least the middle of 2023, taking real earnings back to their levels of 2003. Living standards are on a course to slide by 5% in the current 2022-2023 financial year and by a further 6% in 2023-24. Such a decline has not been seen in Britain since World War II. Unbelievable. So households in Britain will see their spending power slashed by about an average of $3,000. That's about roughly in dollars, $3,471. And by the end of next year, analysts from the Resolution Foundation think tank showed, and that's also, it's cited by The Guardian. So the study indicated that spiking energy bills would cut household incomes in the country by 10% and push an extra 3 million people into poverty. Fantastic. Problem, solution, reacts. Government creates the problem. They're going to come in and save you. Unbelievable. Get ready for that universal basic income. So the outlook for living standards, in my opinion, was shocking and terrifying. And even the think tank said that, noting that without serious government support, here we go, that government support, the drops in the typical household income would be twice as severe as that in the global financial crisis and worse than the 8% drop that followed the oil price shock of the 1970s. Government created this problem. Now we need their help. This is crazy town. Okay, look at this chart. So inflation in the Eurozone jumped to 9.1% in August. I'd say it's higher. A new record in the Eurozone date going back to 1997, according to preliminary data released today by Eurostat. It topped out at 25.2% in Estonia. Germany hit an astonishing record 8.8%. So this spike of inflation starts, suddenly in early 2021 after years of ECB money printing that turned into mania during the pandemic, and after years of ECB's negative interest rate lunacy. For years, it seemed the ECB would get away with these policies without creating, runaway inflation. And then suddenly, guess what? Early 2021, the dam broke. I wonder why. And inflation washed over the land big time. So by June 2021, the Eurozone inflation shot past the ECB's inflation target of 2%. By August 2021, the inflation rate hit 3% and shooting higher. So at the time, the ECB, they regurgitated the Fed's line that this inflation was just temporary. So, remember transitory in the U.S., temporary. And it, unhesitantly continued with its negative interest rate lunacy and printed money with reckless abandon. So energy prices had already started surging in January 2021, from early January 2021 through December 2021. Crude oil prices jumped by over 50%, 51%. That was a huge price gain. And now by January 2022, just before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Eurozone inflation rate had shot to 5.1%. In Germany, it also shot to 5.1%. Belgium, 8.5%. Two Baltic states were already in the double digits. So inflation had become a global problem after years of global money printing and interest rate repression. Just a cluster, what. So the majority of the 9.1% spike in inflation, I want to get this across, the spike occurred before Russia invaded Ukraine. This was then made worse going forward by the energy price spikes, including natural gas, brought about by the Russian invasion of Ukraine and by the sanctions in reaction to the war. So, inflation has continued, to surge with price increases spreading across, the economy. So governments applied, they applied the different strategies to more or less artificially push down the inflation rate. And this, has kept the CPI lower than 9.1%. I would disagree than it would have been without those measures. From looking at the charts, and all the measures did go down a little bit probably, but not as significant as they'd like you to think. So if you take Germany, for example, the government cut fuel taxes and in June began a program of, a €9 or, $9 per month transportation pass as part of the energy cost relief package that allowed people to, forget about your car. Yeah, unlimited travel on rail systems, buses, and trams across the country, which came in handy, and I think that helped a little bit during the summer travel season and for the community and all that good stuff. The program, which contributed to somewhat of a slight dip in CPI in June and July, it ended last week. So September CPI, we don't have those numbers yet. We'll have to see. It's going to be interesting. You think it's going to be low? I don't think so. Germany's CPI hit 6% in November 2021, well before Russia invaded Ukraine. So remember in the U.S., just like they said in the U.S., it's transitory. Well, the U.K. called it temporary. I wish I was on that phone call when they were coming up with that, language. Inflation is suddenly runaway inflation now. The ECB was ridiculously reckless in QE and negative interest rate policies as well. Just like us, they now it's ended. QE is ended. So it ended in June. The balance sheets topped over 8.84 trillion in total assets. And by its most recent balance sheet, as of August 26, total assets were roughly 8.75 trillion. And that was basically down 86 billion from the peak. But at least the negative interest rate, lunacy and QE are finally they're over. However, I think the government printing presses probably got a tune-up, and they don't have them covered up just in case they have to turn them on again, right, folks? Let me tell you what the bottom line is. Inflation is a tax. It's the way the government finances deficit spending. Government spends money. It doesn't collect enough taxes, so it has to run deficits. The Federal Reserve monetizes those deficits, prints money. They call it quantitative easing, but that's inflation. Can put lipstick on a pig, right? Government is getting bigger and bigger, and families across America are going to have to bear the burden through higher prices. Make no mistake, the U.S. government is spending far beyond its means, folks. Although the budget deficit is shrinking as emergency pandemic spending programs wind down. The Biden administration in the United States continues to spend, get this, they don't really talk about this, about $500 billion every single month. $500 billion, piling onto the ever-ballooning deficit. So now that, they've dug a hole, a massive hole that's looking more and more like a grave, they can't go back. They can't go back. So it seems they've overspent, and now because of their investments, the populations have no money to spend other than for fuel, food, and energy. And again, thanks to their policies that are headed higher and higher to the freaking moon. So with regards to Powell, I'm not opposed to casting Powell as a villain, but Powell isn't a villain for pulling his foot a little off the money creation accelerator, which I was calling for a long time ago. True, this is likely to speed up the arrival of a bust, but that's a sign he's doing actually, something less bad than usual. His bad behavior stems from his role in helping create the boom. The problem is the boom, not the bust. After all, busts are primarily caused by booms that come before them, right? So the fact that recessions are often triggered by a slowing of money creation is only a symptom of the larger problem that these folks have created. Without the boom and all the, all investment that comes with it, investors and employers wouldn't depend on, ongoing injections of new money to starve off a depression. Simple, man. We now see this at work with Jerome Powell and Fed policymakers who, driven by political, expediency to, seek an end to the mounting price inflation, are finally, they're backing off the monetary policy that has sustained enormous bubbles and, malinvestments in many cases since before. If you go way back, and I did a talk on this before the 2008 financial crisis, the real cause of our, present weak economy, however, dates back to before the current Fed policymakers were even running the show. The Federal Reserve has raised rates 2.5% despite mainstream assertions to the contrary. It appears the economy has already dipped into a recession. The empirical data shows that. Let's not sugarcoat it. Private sector economic activity has dropped to the lowest levels since early in the COVID lockdowns. The housing market is tanking, and in some respects, you have to look at it regionally. And the economy has charted 2 straight months of negative GDP growth. In regards to housing, though, like I said, you have to look at things regionally, and a lot of people are pulling money out of the stock market and putting it into hard assets because that's where you want to put your money right now. The only thing that is real right now is assets, folks. Savvy investors are buying assets. They're buying real estate. Whether it's an up market or down market, people always buy real estate. People are getting divorced. People are dying. Smart investors are pulling more of their money out of the market right now. Problem is that the crony capitalists and vampires squads are the ones running the system. I mean, look back over the last several decades and you'll see that it really doesn't matter which party is in power. Both have leaned hard towards spending without ways to pay for that spending. You know, we can't even run a barely balanced budget, and the power brokers put into that pretty quickly. So they just want to keep that thing going. So they may play the QT game for a little while, but the minute that QT starts to threaten the supremacy of the crony capitalists, they turn back to the money printer. If not, the central banks, the politicians will distribute the sugar. They're already doing it. As much as $500 billion is basically being handed out in the form of debt cancellation. It's sort of a counteracting at least the next few months of QE. So now the hedge funds are putting together massive capital reserves to buy up the housing and corner the entire property market, in my opinion. They're not stopping by. Maybe a small guy's stopping by, but those hedge funds. So in plain English, the central bank, this is it right here, the central bank can't stop inflation when the federal government needs inflation to survive. They need it. So I have to be an optimist, but those printing machines aren't covered up. They've been tuned up and oiled and ready to start going again, because this is a mess. This is a global mess, I would argue, created by design. And everyone talks about, working in Europe and going to Europe. Wages are even lower there than here. They don't like to work over there. They want their 4-day work week. They want to take off the month of August. But I don't blame the people. I blame the government for what's going on over there. But they're worse. And a lot of people over here don't realize that. Europe is a mess. So this is out of hand. We have people playing politics. But this is out of hand. And it's very dangerous right now. It's very dangerous to people's lives. And there's going to be a lot of problem with starvation, not being able to heat your home through the winter, and the elderly. There's going to be a lot of deaths, and it's shameful. It's shameful what's going on right now, because it didn't have to happen. We have a lot of smart people. Right now, I don't know what's going on. I mean, I don't even know if they're interviewing. They're just putting people in jobs right now. Call me up. Jesus. Take care.